So the next album that we have on the list, the Talking Heads Remain in Light from 1980. What's awesome is I've had two guests on so far that have shared their five favorite albums. And one of the other guests, our mutual friend Alpha Annabellini of Envy of None, he also chose a Talking Heads album. So they're popping up 2 out of 3 here. So they apparently they had a massive influence on music and they changed the game. So what can you tell us about this album?
Interesting. Well, when I was in school still, and I was sort of rock music fan and everything, and I'd heard some Talking Heads before, and it was cool and everything, and then I heard this album, and it was like, it was one of those records. It's like, well, this isn't like nothing I've ever heard, and to be honest, I didn't get it at the beginning. It was like, well, what's this? Where's the heavy guitars? Where's the thing? What I found out later on is that they were kind of trying to play funk, but getting it wrong. But what they did is they really kind of created a new kind of music. It was the Brian Eno production. And of course, he was a big influence when I started at Grand Avenue Studios, and he was there. But when I dissected it, listened to it, it's actually like they developed techniques with like looping and sort of not exactly like a jam band, but they would work things out and do it in such a way that it kind of foreshadowed a lot of the kind of techniques that are used today in the looping and sampling and sort of cut paste technologies that they worked with. It was so interesting. And his style of singing, obviously people love it or hate it. It's one of those things. It's, quite angular singing, but always interesting subject matter. Once in a lifetime, incredible song, incredible, both subject matter. And I heard a great story from that I'm sure you've heard as well, but I heard this from Brian, that he said that once he hears a song in a certain, like with the one on a certain beat, he can never hear it the other way. So when they were working on that song, he heard it in that way. They'd done the backing track, the band kind of went away, and Brian did a bunch of overdubs on it. The band came back and was like, what's going on? This is very, very strange, because Brian had heard the one in a different spot. So he'd done that bass line. Now, I think Tina Weymouth came back and replayed the same bass line the way he did it. But, he'd done all these things to give it that feel of like, where's the one? What's the groove of this song? But it's still grooved, and it was really interesting. And so that album, when I listened to it, it was one of those things that, again, it was like nothing I'd ever heard. It's sort of a change in how I viewed music. So it was profound for me in that way.
So I was familiar with the other 4 albums on your list. I was not familiar with this one. Luckily, I got a little heads up by listening to the live album with Alf. Their other album stopped making sense. So some of those songs are on that album. And man, Talking Heads, they're so unique. I mean, to me, this was a challenging listen. It's a dense album. Like you mentioned, you didn't get it the first time. It requires repeat listening. It requires a good set of headphones. It requires you to kind of throw out the window what you're used to hearing from mainstream music. And it's one where the more I listened to it, the more I got into it, and I started to really understand what they were going for.
Yeah, that's it. I didn't get it at all. The first time I heard it, I thought, what is this load of garbage? I didn't understand it. But the more I heard it, the more I listened to it, the more I got into it. It's like, oh, this is what's going on. And it just, again, songs like Listening Wind at the end, it's just the mood of that song, and the atmosphere that came through in that song. And Born Under Punches, what a great starter. The great starting song. So, it's one of those things that, yeah, because it was different and unique and challenged me in the way that I listened to music, and it was out of my comfort zone. It was unsafe. It was, unique. Not unlike listening the first time I heard, Iron Man or, the early Sabbath stuff. It was like, I was frightened. First time I ever heard that stuff. It was scary. Right? It's like, what's this? And the same thing, I wasn't scared when I listened to the Remain in Light, but it was like, it's challenged me to like redefine how I listen to music and what I thought of music could be.
Well, we fear what we don't understand, right? And the first time we hear those albums, we just don't understand what's going on, and you don't have a foundation to kind of build off of when you're listening to it.
Yeah. No, it was so, when the penny dropped and I got it, it was an enlightening moment in music for me, and how I viewed music, and how how it inspired me to do things. And I mean, it very much helped that I could discuss it with the producer of the album a little bit, and get, like get their perspective on it, and get their a little bit about their techniques. I learned a little bit about the techniques of it. And so I listened to it again. It's like, oh, that's how that loop came around, or that's how that thing. I mean, there's this one state in that Brian was saying about Adrian's solo on Born Under Punches. Basically, they were running tape. Adrian is just setting up his gear and he's making noise. He's not even listening to the song, and they're recording, and that's what they used to actually for the solo. Like, if you listen to that solo, it's very angular, but I love it. The more I listen to it, the more I love it, because it's like there are moments where it just locks in and it's really cool, and then others that are just seemingly random. And it's Adrian Belew just making noises from his guitar, and they're recording without him even listening to the song.
Yeah, it sounds like not just that they're trying to make great music and great songs, but it sounds like musicians in the truest sense trying to try new things, trying to push the envelope, trying to experiment, and it feels like musicians that are just it's about the love of the craft itself more so than we need to make this commercial album that's going to sell. Like, it ends up selling over 1 million copies, but it seems like that wasn't the priority. The priority was the music itself as its own reward.
I think they were trying to redefine how they could write music, for sure.
So I have a few things here that will help our listeners kind of get a sense of what to expect with this album. So there was 3 singles. You mentioned Once in a Lifetime. There's Houses in Motion and Cross-Eyed and Painless. It's considered Talking Heads' magnus opus. And yeah, so a few things here to paint a picture. So it was received as a great cultural event as much as a vivid art pop record. A few things I liked here. Remain in Light was acclaimed by critics who praised its sonic experimentation, rhythmic innovations, and cohesive merging of disparate genres. They drew influence from Nigerian music. They experimented with African polyrhythms, funk, and electronics, recording instrumental tracks as a series of looping grooves. And then one thing is Byrne struggled with writer's block, but adopted a scattered stream of consciousness, lyrical style inspired by early rap. And you can hear that. It sounds, rap has a lot of loops, and this album sounds like it has loops, but it's actually musicians playing that all the way through instead of actually looping.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there might have been a few things that were looped around, but yes, they were trying to use themselves as human beatboxes in a way.
There's a quote here. So one of the band's friends, David Gons, told them that the things one doesn't intend are the seeds for a more interesting future. He encouraged them to experiment, improvise, and make use of mistakes. So I thought that's a nice foundation to build the album upon, is things are going to happen that you didn't think were going to happen, and we can use that as building points.
Yeah. Happy accidents, they're the greatest thing. If you try to shave off all the rough edges and fix every mistake, you'll end up with fairly bland music. But building on the mistakes that you've made actually makes things far more interesting.
So the album was so dense that apparently when they went to play it live, you can't pull that off as a quartet, and they expanded to a 9-piece band live. Did you ever see them live?
No, I've not seen them live. No. I've seen the Stop Making Sense video, but yeah, it's a lot going on. But the way that the density, it's like the wall of sound, right? It's like Phil Spector's wall of sound. The more and more and more and more, you need a bigger band to recreate that kind of sound.
And did you also love that live album, Stop Making Sense, like Alf loved it?
I liked it. It wasn't my favorite musical project of theirs, no.
Okay. I have a quote. This is this is to do with Radiohead, who are influenced by that album. So Radiohead credited Remain in Light as a major influence on their 2000 album Kid A. The guitarist Johnny Greenwood had assumed Remain in Light was composed of loops, but later learnt from Harrison that Talking Heads had played the parts repetitively. Greenwood said, it's played the same exact thing for 5 minutes, which is really interesting. And that's why it's not exhausting to listen to, because you're not hearing the same piece of music over and over again. You're hearing it slightly different every time. There's a lesson there. So that influenced future Radiohead music.
Yep. Well, we'll talk about Radiohead in a bit.
We will. You're seeing, you know, the albums for you, they start in 1971 and 75 and 80, and you're seeing the influences of some of them on the ones that are coming later on. One point is, so now as we finish the third album we're talking about, all three of those first albums, the first three albums, they all have just 8 songs on them. David, was that the sweet spot? 8 songs, all killer, no filler. What do you think?
I tend to like shorter albums. Under an hour is sort of my, I love the 45-minute album. I understand when the CD came along, it got longer, but I'm less of a fan of a 70-minute album. For me, it's just too long. I love 8-song, 45-minute records. I like 10-song, 50-minute records. When they get a little higher, it's a bit more of a challenge. I've got one in here that does get to that, but yeah, the shorter the record for me, I love. See, I want to listen to it again, right? And I find that sometimes, unless I'm listening to a compilation of somebody's greatest work, then I find that from the same artist, one album, if it goes too long, I get bored after a while and I stop listening.
Yeah, I find, 8 to 12 songs is kind of the sweet spot. Whenever I get an album and there's 15, 17 songs, my first thought is there has to be some filler on here. Like there has to be 3 to 5 songs that if they remove those, this would be an infinitely better album. That's how I look at it.
I generally find that too, although I do have a lot of clients that like to do double albums. So I do participate in those things.
That's very true. There are a few artists that have enough great music that can pull off a full 80-minute album or a double album.